Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 635. Today we're going to take a look at Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. So this is the third Warhammer Quest game in the history of Games Workshop. There was one a long time ago, and then a couple of years ago they did Silver Tower and then Shadows over Hammerhall for their Age of Sigmar universe. This is the first time, I think, that they've ever done a Warhammer Quest set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. It is very similar to the later iterations, the Silver Tower and Shadows over Hammerhall. You've got a similar kind of dice mechanic. The gist of it is basically a dungeon crawl, but it's a whole lot more than just a basic dungeon crawl. You've got 50-some figures that you're going to assemble and play through. It has some like legacy-ish components, and so you can play through it as a campaign, and it does a campaign in a very different way than a traditional, kind of run-of-the-mill, not really run-of-the-mill, but like Descent or any of those kind of games. It's a little bit different than those. So the idea of the Black Fortress is these mysterious like giant space stations / spaceships that have lots of crazy mysterious artifacts and are from, like thousands of years ago, and nobody really knows what they are. And so I think that is tying into some of the current Warhammer 40,000 lore as well, although I'm not too up to speed on that. So let's jump in and talk about how the game works and the mechanics and kind of the legacy aspect of the game, as well as some of the innovations that they have here. And then I will come back and I'll tell you what I think. So just to kind of give you a component overview, you've got all these figures here, which I'll give you kind of a close-up of. I've posted pictures of these on my Instagram and Facebook if you want to see a better shot of mediocrely painted models. You've got some different chits and things, which we'll talk about, and here you can see some of the extra boards. I went ahead and set up a map here. These are made up of several of these pieces. They're all double-sided. And you'll be setting these up based on sometimes these combat encounter cards. I'll talk a little bit more about how that works. So you've got kind of a main station there. You can see these other cardboard pieces right there. Those are the spaceships that some of your heroes will be traveling in. They'll give you special abilities that you can use during the game in the combat here, as well as kind of in like a town phase. So after you go through a couple of missions, you might go back to this area called Precipice, which is sort of a way station outpost just outside the Blackstone Fortress that you can go and like trade and do all kinds of stuff, sort of level up, although there's not really levels in this game per se. And then you've got some other things, different cards and stuff here. You've got this initiative track, which is going to sort of outline the rounds of battle. So you're going to deal out cards for each of the characters that you're currently using, as well as these numbered icons there, which are going to represent different groups of bad guys. And down here, you've got these cards. So here we got the main card for Janice Drake, and you can see you've got dice slots there. And so on your turn, you're going to be rolling dice and using those, and it gives you different weapons and special abilities and so on. And then on the back of these will be like an inspired version. So it's sort of a temporarily leveled up, sort of powered up version of that character, which you can actually get them to be, some of them, permanently inspired. And then over here we've got an example of some of the data cards for some of the bad guys. These are especially not my favorite. These are the Negavolt cultists, particularly mean and brutal, and you'll start out facing these earlier in the game. So they got the little weapons and special abilities there. Then on the back of these, you have like kind of a behavior table there, and you roll a d20 and you'll kind of look at kind of what they're doing, and you can see like if they're hidden, they got a better chance to charge, and then if they're engaged, they got more of a shot to do an onslaught, but they might do something else here, and then some other ideas there. And then a similar one here for the Trader Guardsmen, different weapons. So there's actually different models of these, so based on kind of what weapons they have, they'll do different stuff. And then again, they have a behavior table there. Now you're not going to start fighting against all of the bad guys in the game. That's going to be part of the legacy aspect, part of the campaign. And so the way that works is you actually have these different envelopes for the different characters. So you can see this was Janice's envelope, and here we have the envelope for Amalan Shadow Guide. And so you're going to put this character in there. This is like a stasis chamber. They have these cool backs on them. And then you're going to put any kind of items and stuff that they've collected in here with them. And so on your adventure, you're always going to use 4 characters. So you could solo this. You could play it with 2, 3, or 4 players. You can even play it with 5. We have one player kind of play sort of as the bad guy, sort of as an overlord player. I'll talk more about that in the review part. But typically it's a co-op game, 1 to 4 players. And then as you sort of collect things, you can say, okay, we did enough adventuring with Amelin. Let's put him aside and then go use somebody else. And so we could use Janice this time. And you can just swap him in and out. And each player doesn't necessarily have a character that they play. You can trade them and, you know, I want to play Janice this time, you play that. This really is your pool of characters, and they can permanently die. So as you go through the campaign, you're going to go through this legacy deck. I'll talk more in detail about that in a minute. But if your character dies, you're going to go ahead and put this card in with their envelope to know that, hey, remember a month ago when we were playing, we can't use this character anymore because they're dead. And so one of the ways that you can lose the game is if you don't have 4 characters to bring into play. So if you have 5 or more dead, then you can't field 4 characters because there's only 8 in the game. And so you don't have enough characters to continue, so you've lost the campaign, at which point you can take everything out of the envelopes and then reset. And the other way to lose is to go through this whole legacy deck and then have to draw a new one. You're going to draw a new one every time you get done with what's called an expedition or this adventure. And if you have to go draw a new one and you can't, then you've lost the game. So the idea is to actually go through these kind of random instance dungeons or spaceship dungeons, and then get through and get enough clues to unlock these 4 different strongholds. Once you get through all 4 strongholds, then you can go into the hidden vault. And once you beat the hidden vault, then you can open this envelope, which I have not opened because I have not beaten the hidden vault, and it's going to give you something. I don't know what it is. I do know that these hidden vault envelopes are not the same in each game. I don't know how many different versions of whatever's in here is in here, but I do believe, I'm not sure, but I do believe this will have a hint towards an expansion or towards some other like lore development for the 40K universe. And they also give you an envelope. If you want to pause an adventure midway, you can put the cards in this extra envelope here to kind of pause it, because some of these adventures can take a couple hours, kind of depending on how things go. And then you can also put the legacy cards that you draw in this so you can remind you what happened. So when you go through the legacy deck here, there's a couple of things. You might get some different effects inside the fortress itself. These countdown cards, which do nothing other than kind of count it down. And then here's another example. You might add the Chaos Beastmen as a possible adversary. So it's going to add more difficult adversaries as you play through. So you can keep track of all those by putting them in here and then knowing, how to kind of set up your game next time. So I just want to give you some semblance of an impression of the miniatures. Like I said, check me out on Facebook or Instagram if you want to see slightly better imagery here. But here you've got your different characters. You've got this Imperial Urbot thing, Iron Knight, something like that. I can't remember the names of everything. This is a navigator. You've got these 2 sort of crazy religious type figures here. This is sort of the main character, Janice Drake. These 2 little ratlings, these little halfling fellas, they kind of act as one group together. So you're going to be, if you're playing them, you're going to be controlling both of them at the same time. Here you have a Kroot, which is sort of like a Tau type fellow, like a fish. And then we have here an Eldar character there. So those are all kind of the heroes that you can pick and choose from. And then in the back here, we have our friend, the Negavolt cultist. Big jerks, these guys. They like to do a lot of damage and break through your armor and shock the heck out of you. And then I believe this is sort of the main antagonist here. This is Chaos Giant, Chaos Lord. And then he's got his little Chaos Space Marine buddies with him. And then over on this side, you can see there are some couple of Psychers back there and the Beastmen. These little spindle drones, which are sort of like automated things that are sort of coming out of the fortress itself. And then over here, we got a whole mess of traitor guardsmen over there. So that's kind of a cool type of thing. Oh, and then behind them, we have these Urgles right there. So you can kind of see them. These are just these different ghouls there, if they'll focus on that right there. And so there's a couple of these that you can fight as well. So that's kind of the gist of the types of models you'll be fighting. So during the course of the game, you're going to be going on an expedition, typically fighting through various different mazes and layouts inside the fortress itself, as also dealing with kind of little sort of minor narrative tidbits. So let's talk about that. So the game rules are made up of several rule books. And this is kind of a double-edged sword. It's kind of a blessing and a curse. It gets you going really, really quickly. And playing your first game right out of the bat, you'll be jumping in, being able to work through a very long session. I would say sort of the counter edge to that is it does make it a little bit difficult to look up something you might have forgotten, because you won't necessarily know which book to look in, and each book kind of references the other book. So it's kind of a rules lookup and index. It's kind of lacking in there. They have released an FAQ, which I would definitely take a look at. It definitely answered some questions that I had, and definitely I've seen other people have questions there. So take a look at the FAQ on the Warhammer community site. And then there's some other stuff just based on having to jump back and forth in the rules. They're in the rules and they're clear, but it's easy to miss. So go check the forum on Board Game Geek. And I'm 99% sure I'm playing it correctly now. But the first thing you want to do is read the rules booklet. And this is going to tell you kind of how to set everything up and give you kind of the gist. And so once you get into an adventure where you have combat, you can look at this. And you could really play the game like this. Just set this rule book up, choose your characters and go. And then once you have a combat, kind of go through this because everything is sort of bite-sized. And then once you're done with your first kind of expedition or adventure, then you're going to go to Precipice, which is, again, like the town phase. This gives you some rules for that. And this also has the rules for the fortresses and the strongholds, in the back, as well as the final sort of boss battle, if you will, here in the hidden vault and how to do that. So all that's in there. And then they have a cool little kind of background here. And then some data sheets if you want to use these characters in Warhammer 40,000 games. And I do understand they're actually going to have rules for using them in Kill Team at some point as well. This is not coming in the game, but they give you a sample chapter for this novel, which I've picked this up and read a couple of chapters. This is cool. Kind of gives you a little bit of a narrative background. I've been enjoying the story, and I've found that that kind of enhances my gameplay. So that's also available if you want that. So the first thing that the main rule book is going to tell you to do is set up this deck here. Now I've got all the cards from the exploration deck in the stack there. You don't typically do that. You set up 4 of these combat cards, which I'll give you an example. This is what I've set up on the table right now. So it'll tell you all the different tiles to set up as well as the different encounters. So you've got 1, 2, 3 encounters in this particular. You can have 2 up to 4. And the idea is that you're going to start on always on this little kind of triangle piece. And this is called a maglev. It's like an elevator. You're basically trying to get from here to one of these exits and figure out which one of these is the other elevator to escape. Sometimes the game will generate that for you, or you can take an action to sort of summon it and then get out of there without getting too brutally beat up. Along the way, of course, you want to stop at these different locations, which is going to allow you to do a search action and then find discovery, either getting you like cool little items that you can trade in or getting you clues, again, to unlock the strongholds. Now, the other types of cards that you can do are these challenge cards here. And these are just little sort of small narrative things. They're almost like little mini games sometimes. They're like a little choice. Think of it as like those crossroads cards in Dead of Winter, sort of. So just little kind of narrative, little interludes that you can have. So you're going to have 4 challenge cards in the deck and then 4 of these combat cards in the deck. And you're going to shuffle those 4 up. And so you know that you're going to have kind of half the time doing, relatively longer combat sessions, and then the other half doing quick little choices that maybe take you 5 minutes at most, or a couple of seconds. So you're going to work through there. Now, each time you go finish a card, then you have an opportunity to bail out. And having played this a couple of times, there are going to be times where maybe you bail out after the first card because you got beat up so bad. But if you go all the way through the 8 cards that you've gone through, you've made some discoveries here. I'll just kind of show you these. This is a clue card. There's a bunch of these in here. There's also these architect cards, which can just be kind of nondescript, or they can actually have a kind of a special thing. So you can see this is Janice Drake's secret agenda. And so what that means, I'll just tell you that now, is that if you start the game with that secret agenda for Janice, then you get to start off inspired every time after. So you kind of beefed up stats and abilities and stuff like that. So think of those as kind of real minor side quests. So you're going to work through those, set up the battlefield when you draw a combat card, or otherwise try to complete the challenge. Now, if you get a combat card, there's a couple things that are going to happen. You're going to deal out cards from this encounter deck. And again, you don't start with everything in the encounter deck, but as you play through the game, you're going to get them. And then based on the number of encounters, in this case, remember we had 3, you're going to deal 1, 2, 3 cards. And then based on the position, so you can see it's 1, 2, and then 3, you're going to look at the number. So the first card, you're going to just look at the number 1. So number 1 matches number 1. That means we're going to have 4 Negavolt cultists, and they're going to be spawned here around the number 1 spawn point. And then we're going to deal with the next card. This is going to be 2. So on the number 2 spawn point, we're going to have 5 Traitor Guardsmen. And then sometimes here, like on number 3, you could have some more spawn, or you could have a special kind of condition sometimes on these, where it says it costs 2 hexes of movement instead of 1 to enter a hex with cover. So sometimes you'll have little effects that kind of change up the level that way. So the levels are kind of a combination of these combat cards with the encounters that are dealt out. And that's going to tell you how to set up this initiative deck here. We know that we have the 3 spawn points, and pretend that we're using these 4 characters there. You're always going to shuffle these up. The rest of these will be out of the game. And then each round of combat, you're going to shuffle these up and then go into the initiative phase. And then you're going to activate each of these groups in that order. And then once you get through, you're going to go through resolve and go through it again. Now, when you activate a player, you're obviously going to look at the dice that they've rolled at the very start of the round. Everybody rolls their dice at the same time. And then sometimes this will move around, round over round and challenge after challenge. There'll be effects that target kind of the start player. It doesn't really matter who this is because, again, everything is done by this initiative track. But sometimes the start player will have a choice or something will hurt them or something like that. So you keep passing this around to keep track of that. But then on my turn, I'm going to spend dice to do different things. Now you can do basic stuff. So we can see here, when I spend any die, I can spend any die to move. I can move 2 hexes. And then I can spend dice to do different weapon abilities. So if we zoom in a little bit more, we can see here like a pistol, rapier. I can use that sort of combo with any die, a 1+. So I can spend that 2. Let's maybe I moved 2 hexes here and then got close to a guy and then I spent that. And then here you can see, based on your range to whatever you're sort of targeting, you're going to roll different dice. So the combat dice come in all kinds of varieties here. So we can see here, if we're within 1 hex or 2 to 3 hexes, we're going to roll these kind of triangle decahedron dice. I'm not sure what the actual shape is. These are the triangles though. You can see that. If they're really far away, 4+, then you're going to roll these really crappy 6-sided dice, which barely ever hit. These triangle ones only have a 50% chance of actually hitting. These are even worse than that. And then if you have a really good shot, or maybe you've leveled up and inspired, you're going to roll this one here, and this has a lot of more hits on it. So you also got different abilities and stuff. Like this guy says, in the first turn of combat, Janice Drake can perform a gambit without activating dice being spent, and so on. So there's abilities like that. And so you're going to go and operate and spend all these dice. Now you can keep a die here if you want, and that'll allow you to do overwatch and sort of react. So if something ends its move and it's within kind of your line of sight, then you can spend this die and take a legal attack action based on how far away they are. Now you can't do an overwatch if you haven't actually activated yet. So you have to have actually done something and then left a die there. Oh, and I should say, when you go into overwatch, you actually reduce the die by 1. And then when you activate a hostile group, you're going to look at which hostile group that is. And remember, hostile group 1 was a Negavolt cultist. And then we're going to take a look down here and we're going to see, we're going to activate each of those models individually. And so then you're going to roll the D20 and look at this. So let's say the Negavolt cultists were hidden, they weren't in line of sight. We rolled here a 3, and that's going to do the recharge action, which happens to be a special ability that they have. So remove a wound counter from the Negavolt cultist. If the cultist does not have a wound counter, treat this result as an advance. So you think anything that's in bold is going to be a special type of action, and the rest of these are sort of generic. All of them can do it. So an onslaught will be like attack twice. Charge will be run up and attack, and if you're not close enough to do an attack, then you just move again, and so on. And again, that's going to change based on kind of the current state of these. And some of these tables are a little bit more complicated based on the the type of unit that's there. Now, in addition to the dice that each player has on their data card, they're also going to get access to these Destiny dice up here, which is a mechanic that's carried over from the other more recent Warhammer Quest games. So as you're setting up the initiative, you're going to roll these dice here, and then anything that is a duplicate of another dice, so you can say I rolled this, I got a bunch of 1s. Anything that matches another dice, all those dice come off. Anything that's individual will stay up here. And so now the players collectively have access to a 2 and a 4 that they can use. Now on a player's turn, they can't use more than 2 of these dice. And you try not to be selfish about it, right? Because, maybe somebody else can get better use out of it. So you spend these dice just as if you had spent them on your player card. And then at the beginning of the next round, you'll go ahead and re-roll these. And then we will see there, that's a bummer there, because we had 2 6s, the 6s match and the 1s match, they come off, so all we've got is the 2. Although there is a character, I think it's the Tau character, who can actually recover 1 die that was discarded, so that's a good ability to have. Now, one thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to take wounds. So if you take a wound, you're going to go ahead and mark that. So at the start of the next round, you're going to roll one less dice. So in this case, you're only going to roll 3 dice because you've only got slots for those. Sometimes you can take a grievous wound, and that means you're going to put it in like that. These cannot be healed until you actually finish the whole expedition and go back to Precipice. In that case, you just kind of automatically heal all the wounds. But as you're going from combat card to combat card, as you start to accrue these grievous wounds especially, but any wounds are really kind of a bummer, because you could very quickly get, let's say, a grievous wound, and then bam, you get 2 wounds and you haven't even activated yet, and you're really hurting, so you got to be very careful. So as you take these and lose dice, and then lose dice for future turns, is going to hinder you a lot. You might rely on the Destiny dice yourself if you're very wounded and everybody else isn't. So you definitely got to watch these, and this is what's going to make you want to kind of bail out, because like I said, you can die. So what happens is, if you have this full of wounds or grievous wounds or whatever, and then you're going to take another wound on top of being full, then you're going to be out of action for the rest of that combat. And then in the recovery step, hopefully if everybody makes it out, then you're going to roll the d20 there, to see if you actually die. And if you roll very low, then you're going to die, and then this character will be out. Although there is a way to resurrect the characters, it's a very slim chance, but you can get around to actually resurrecting dead characters. It is possible. And I should say it is possible here for the Urbot here to actually recover his own grievous wounds, and players can take ability to recuperate, spend any die to heal, or theoretically heal a non-grievous wound. And the way that you do that, you see everybody has a vitality roll, so you can say I would roll the triangle. If I roll a success, which I didn't there, then I would have gotten it. Now the other thing, before I show you kind of a quick combat example, is this agility stat here. Now after the initiative here is set up, if players want, they can kind of swap slots if they're adjacent to each other. If they say, oh, you know what, you should go first and then I'll go second. And you also have the ability to possibly make an agility roll to move to the left of one of the hostile cards. So if you look down here again at the agility, you can see Drake there rolls the triangle for that. So if he gets a success, which is anything that has a mark on it, so you can get a success or critical success. So if you get a success, then you can go ahead and move that like that. Now if you get a critical success, then you can put yourself anywhere you want on there. So let's say over here, Dayak, he gets a critical success on his, so he could jump all the way to the front of number 1 like that. Although that's a pretty rare thing. But you have to spend an activation die to do that gambit. So if you remember down here, Janice, in the first turn of combat, so the very, very first turn, he can make that roll without spending one of his activation dice to do that. So you have to kind of spend that out of your turn. So combat is very, very simple here. You're typically, again, just going to look at the range of the weapon on the card. You've got this stick here. You take it from the center of the attacking hex to the target hex like that. See if it's not blocked by any walls. And then you also check for cover here. So if we look at these thick white lines, those are cover. And then if you take a zoom up there, see those red lines around there, this is a straight wall there that's impassable. You can't move through there or see through there. If you have cover, what that's going to do is just make it a little bit harder to hit your target. So let's say this Chaos Jerk was going to attack them and they had the triangle. Let's try to roll a hit there. So if we got a normal hit through cover, and that's not going to do anything because you need a critical success to get through cover like that. Now if that wasn't there, he would get a hit, and then Janice here would roll his defense die, which is also a triangle. And so he would need a critical or better to beat that. And then now if he had a critical attacked on him and he had a critical that would block that, and if he had just blocked it with this, that would actually reduce the critical down. So if you get hit just kind of with a normal hit, you're going to take just a normal wound. And if you get a hit with a critical, you're going to take a grievous wound. Now, if you hit the bad guy's back with just a normal wound, that will take 1 wound. We'll keep track of that. Some monsters only have 1 wound. If you give them a grievous wound, that actually counts as 3 wounds. They don't really have the concept of grievous. But if you do a critical on them, that's going to be grievous, which is 3 wounds total. That's kind of your basic combat. You can get special abilities to allow you to do multiple, upgrade your dice, and so on. After you're done with your activation, you're going to look at the number of wounds that you've killed. So anything that you've killed, you're going to add up all those wounds. You're going to roll this d20. If you roll equal to or less than that number, then you're going to get an inspiration point. And you're going to keep track of these with these little tokens here. And these inspiration points you can spend. And you can spend them in a few different ways. You can spend them to re-roll the dice down here on your sheet. You can spend 2 of them to try to do a gambit, like I was talking about just a second ago, without actually spending an activation die. You can spend 3 of them to do a free search action, or you can spend 3 of them just to inspire yourself and then flip the card over and become inspired. Now, searching is interesting because typically you need to be on one of these spots where initially everything spawns. You need to be on that spot and not adjacent to any monsters. You can do a search action. Now, a search action costs you 4 or higher, and then you're going to draw off the discovery deck. So again, you can spend those inspiration points to search anywhere. You don't have to actually be on one of these spots. So that's kind of a handy way to get inspiration if you don't really feel like inspiring yourself. Maybe the board's kind of clear of monsters and stuff. Then you can do that to get access to some of these discovery cards, which again, these clues are very, very important for completing the game. Now again, how do you escape? You need to be adjacent to an exit, which is one of these things here. Typically there's 2 or 3 exits on the board. Again, you spend a 4+, then you're going to summon another elevator like so, and you're going to just kind of stick that right in there. And then all the players need to be on top of that. And then once all the players are there, all the players that are still, alive, then you're going to exit and go to the next card or escape and run for your life. Now the game can also generate that as well. So before you get a chance to actually decide which exit you want, it'll put, the elevator somewhere maybe that's not convenient, or maybe it is. So that's pretty much the gist. The only other real important thing is we talked about cover. So remember, cover making it very difficult to hit. Now one thing you can do is, in addition to the dice you want to spend, so maybe you have a weapon that you want to spend a really high die to do, but the guys in cover, you want to kind of ensure that you can do that. You can spend another die to aim. So you spend any die, one or higher, aim, and then use your attack die. So it's going to use you 2 dice, and then you're going to basically ignore cover. And there's also special weapons and things you can get to help you ignore cover. So that's basically combat and stuff. And then once you're done with that, once you want to escape or you've gone through the deck, you're going to return here to Precipice. Now each of the characters, and some characters actually share a ship based on the narrative. During the game, you have these one-time abilities that you can use on the support side. These are very, very powerful, and definitely make use of these. And so the one-time per game, you can do that. And then once you get back to Precipice, everybody's going to flip these over to the facility side, and there's a special ability there. So what's going to happen is everybody's going to heal their wounds up, discard all the inspiration, and then you're going to deal out 3 resources from a deck specific to this one. So this one here is called the Traveler. So we're going to deal 3 cards off the Traveler, and then these are going to be cool items that you can buy. You can see there's the cost there in the Archaeotech that you're going to discover. This is a very expensive one here for 6. And so again, in the discovery deck, you're going to get clues, or you're going to get Archaeotech stuff. And you're going to trade those in, put those back in the discovery pile, and then get cool items. You also have the ability to go to the ship and take the special ability of the facilities of the ship as well. So there's some cool kind of out-of-game events and things that you can trigger there, as well as get some cool items to put in your stasis envelope and then take with you on the next adventure. That's pretty much the game. Again, you're trying to get through this discovery deck. You're trying to get 4 clues. Anytime you get 4 clues, you can spend that to try to take on a stronghold. There's 4 strongholds. Once you get complete all 4 strongholds, then you can go after the hidden vault. Now again, like I said, each time you make a trip through the expedition, you're going to flip a card off the legacy deck. There's only 12 cards here, so this is kind of a timer as well. But that is pretty much the gist of the game. Let's see what I think. Okay, so that's Blackstone Fortress. So let's get to kind of the 3 pillars of reviews that I like to go over. First is player count. I mentioned that I would talk about that in the walkthrough. So you can play this solo, which is what I've been doing. You can play it up to 4 players co-op, each player kind of taking a character. You can do a 5th player, which I haven't tried. But to me, it seems sort of counterintuitive, I guess is the right word, to have one player kind of playing against everybody. And then, it says even theoretically you can swap. So maybe one time I play the Overlord, I'm playing as the Fortress kind of against the players. And the next time Billy does it, and then I'm playing a character. But I think collectively, like, the mindset's going to be, hey, let's get through this as an adventure together. And then why is this jerk getting in our way? But if you had somebody maybe play as the Overlord all the time, that might be kind of fun. But there's not really a lot of choice. that the Overlord player has. Although there is a variant in there where you can kind of have like leadership scores and get like kind of like victory points. It's an optional variant. So if you wanted to kind of play it competitively, maybe a little bit more closer to the narrative, because in the narrative, the characters aren't really necessarily on the same team. They're just kind of happen to be working together. So if you want to kind of add that dimension, that's there. But for me, I'm more about playing this solo or co-op and kind of going through it as a legacy style campaign. So the player count, though, it's kind of there for all the player counts, I think, although the 5-player seems a little bit wonky to me. But I haven't tried it, so there's that. In terms of the time that it takes to play the game, that's going to kind of vary pretty drastically, because you can get into a combat, get hammered, and be like, I really don't want this character to die. Can we leave? But when you leave, you're going to flip a legacy card. So that's 1 out of 12, 2 out of 12, 3 out of 12. And you need to collect 4 clues. So if you come out of an adventure with no clues, that's a pretty big waste of time. I don't think, like, not as a gamer, it's cool, but like in terms of the story and trying to win, wow, you just waste a lot of time. You're going to be under the gun next time. You're going to be under that much more pressure to get at the clues. But so if you play through, though, let's say all 8 cards, you're going to go through 4 combats, and the combat cards themselves can take, it's going to kind of vary, but I would say probably 30 minutes to an hour per combat card. And then those challenge cards can take a couple of minutes. Sometimes they're going to be read the card, make a decision, roll a die or something, and then, then it's over. Or they're going to take like, 5, maybe 10 minutes. And then, so you're going to go for those. Let's say they're 15 minutes worth of challenge cards, and then you have 4 hours worth of combat cards if you go all the way through. Although 4 hours would be definitely, I think, not the norm. I think an expedition as a whole will take anywhere from like half an hour to 3 hours. So it's going to kind of vary. Now the cool thing is you can, if you get into a situation where we've played through a couple of combats, I'm like, man, we've been here for 2 hours and we want to keep going. We don't want to go back to precipice because we're doing well, but we got to go. So you can take those cards, put them in its own stasis envelope. You just put those exploration cards in there without looking at them, and you're good to go. And then you can just come back tomorrow or whenever, and then pick up right where you left off in the middle of the campaign. Or excuse me, in the middle of the expedition. So that's pretty cool. So even if you get a long one, it's not a big deal. And then in terms of kind of playing through the whole campaign, I actually talked to some people that play tested this before the game came out and stuff, and they've gotten about 40. I'm just kind of averaging based on anecdotes. I would say 40 to 50 hours, and they're kind of like getting to the end now. So you're going to have some good gameplay for your buck here. And then there's nothing stopping you from, once you complete the campaign or lose the campaign, which I feel like is a possibility. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. But once you get through it, you could play it again, and maybe you didn't use all the characters this time through. Maybe you only use 6 of the characters. You never got to these other 2 because you didn't feel like it. You could next time try to play with those 2 and kind of a different mix-up. And it's very easy to reset as well. So it's a campaign that you can envelope up, put everything back into its original baggies and then start over. So that's kind of the playtime. And now sort of what would I compare it to in terms of other games? Well, easily you can compare it to the other Warhammer quests, especially the recent ones, Silver Tower, Shadows over Hammerhall. It's got the same dice mechanic, the same Destiny dice mechanic. It's got sort of similar combat mechanics. In this case, it's got specialized combat dice. Those square D6 dice are really crappy. Like, you never hit with those. Even the triangle one's a 50-50 shot. You got, it's 50-50. You got a couple of crits on there. I've played it where it's like, how come when I roll the die, I don't hit anything, and then when the game rolls the die, it hits every time? That's going to happen. Once you get into the kind of what is it? It's a 12-sided die? I think it's a 12-sided die. Then you're going to be hitting more often. And so you really start to, and this is the good thing. So you might say, this is a bunch of dice and rolling luck. The game can be downright brutal, absolutely brutal. And so you've really got to take care of your wounded characters, put them in situations where they're not going to get hit. The game AI seems to be sort of, I don't call it smart, because you're just rolling a d20 on a table. It's crafty enough that it's going to occasionally get off some kind of very inopportune moments. And you're like, Oh, well, that actually kind of makes sense because, sometimes it'll do, I think it's called an aim or something, where it'll like snipe the one that's furthest away from it. It's a low chance that it will do that. But in terms of, if you're playing against a player, they're like, okay, yeah, your guy in front of me, great. He's full health. That guy in the back that has 1 hit point or none left, and all I need to do is hit him, I'm going to shoot him. So the game will sometimes do that. So that's pretty cool. So you got to be, curious about how that's going to work. And then one thing I didn't cover actually in the rules is the way reinforcements work. So once you start to slay models, there's a small potential that they'll start to kind of come back and spawn. And so you've got to position kind of away from some of these exit points where they can kind of start to flood back in. Something you got to kind of watch out for. But I really like how brutal it is. One of the things with Silver Tower especially is it was a co-op. Silver Tower was a co-op like this one. Shadows over Hammerhall was a one versus many kind of thing. Silver Tower could be very easy if you had a particular group of characters, and definitely if you're like playing with 4 of them. It just seemed like after a while, especially once you got a couple of item cards, you're just kind of rolling over the thing. Although you could kind of, if you know what you're doing, you can kind of play like less optimal characters and like play 2 of them, and then it's more interesting that way. But this is way more brutal than that, and I like that because you're like, okay, we can go in, and then okay, I got to bail out, but like, whoa, I don't really want to bail out because then we're gonna flip our 5th legacy card, and man, we've only done like 1 stronghold so far, and so there's a real kind of pressure under the gun, and it's like, you know what, Janice is gonna have to die, like, because we need to get through this, and we need to get these clue cards out of here, and you're gonna push on whatever, Janice, you're dead, and it's not that big a deal because that player's going to be out for that time, but they're going to be able to pick up another character and play them once you resolve everything. So that's an interesting. It's not something that really happens in these dungeon crawl games where it's like, he's going to die. It's just, that's too bad. That's how it's Warhammer 40,000, right? It's that people die. So I really like that aspect of it. So the legacy part of it, so I'm kind of moving from what is it like, obviously it's like Warhammer Quest. You can compare this to like, if you really wanted to, like a Gloomhaven, because it's a legacy dungeon crawl. I mean, obviously Gloomhaven has like this much content, and this is, pretty good content, and we'll have more. But, compared to like a Descent or something, it's kind of in that ballpark. But the whole aspect of the way that you go through the campaign and the way that the legacy deck works, the way the ships work when you go back to Precipice, and the whole pressure under the gun type of thing is really cool. I mean, to me, this is what really kind of pushes it above most of these other dungeon crawl games, is that whole aspect of you can die, you can have things go terribly wrong, and you really have to be very efficient with how you spend your archaeotech to get the good items that you want to get, and kind of spend a little bit of time kind of developing your character that way, so that when you do go into the dungeon, because the items are really going to help. And one thing I definitely would say, do not ignore the abilities on the spaceships. Some of those can get you out of a pinch where like you're literally going to wipe. And I mean, because it's brutal, I'm not joking. And then you can use one of those abilities, and that's going to save you, scrape you by. You're going to get through, heal a couple of wounds. You're like, okay, yeah, we're doing pretty good. And then you're going to get those item cards out of the kind of going shopping. And those are typically one-time use things that are pretty strong. And then you kind of want to really manage that. So the kind of that whole resource management aspect of the game is very, very strong because of that pressure. So I think to me, that's the main thing that I really like about this game, is like they really kind of went for that brutal, grim kind of atmosphere in the dungeon crawl, and not really kind of trying to make it an RPG kind of thing or anything like that. It's a very board gamey sort of Euro art resource kind of thing going on. But then you've got your crazy combat and all that kind of stuff that would make sense in this kind of game. So I definitely highly recommend the game. I would say, kind of if you're on the board game side of it coming into this, I would not necessarily be afraid of the models. They are push fit. I did take a shot at this. I've had kind of lukewarm results, let's say, with push fit style models in the more recent past with Games Workshop with the Soul Wars box and stuff, and some of the recent Shadespire stuff. I had better luck with some of the older Shadespire stuff and the Blood Bowl. That went together really well. This stuff for me went together really, really well. I didn't use any glue on these miniatures at all. You can see I painted them up and everything. I did glue them to the bases just to kind of make sure. So I just put a little bit of glue on those little stands. And some of those you probably didn't really need to, but I just did. So you can clip them out. They're going to be pretty easy to put together. You can just push them in. They are color coded, so the heroes are red. I didn't show you that obviously because they're painted, and the other ones are, what color were they? I think they were blue. They were blue or gray or something. Anyway, so you can kind of see who's who on the battlefield. So you can push them together and not have to paint them. So if you're coming from a board game perspective, I think this is really going to be up a board gamer's alley. And obviously, if you're kind of coming from this from the miniature side, you're going to love painting the miniatures because they're great and they look stunning. And I think there's a lot of cool, types of schemes you could apply to this and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I highly recommend the game. I'm actually surprised because I'm like an Age of Sigmar guy. That's like my miniature game jam right now. And 40K is cool, and I like playing Kill Team and stuff a lot. And this really has I'm like, this is rad because like you're in this like crazy fortress that like has a mind of its own. It's like spitting out these droids, and there's these Chaos Marines that have been in there for 10 days or 1,000 years. You don't really know. And it's like, it always has this feeling to me. This is hard to put in a review because maybe it's just me, but it's like, there's like something, creepy under the covers here. And it really does give you that. And I think a lot of that is the pressure of the people dying and all that stuff. But just and some of this is coming from reading the lore in the book, which they do give you a sample chapter of in the box, and which I read, and I was like, this seems cool. So I got the book. It's pretty cool. So there's this creepy, grimdark stuff going on that the game exudes that. And even the challenge cards, like I didn't really talk about that. The challenge cards, not just the combat cards where you set up a map. Some of the challenge cards are like, one time we did it, and then it was like, so 3 of my guys have grievous wounds, and I haven't even done a combat yet. What the heck? So those are the kind of like the cool thing. Like in Silver Tower, you had the little book, like the Tales of the Arabian Nights style book where you go and read an entry. Sometimes events would happen, you'd read the book. That's what these are. But you're like guaranteed to just have something like smack you. You'll be in like the elevator, and it's like, oh, fire shoots out and like jacks you up. Or there might be some clue or some discovery. You're kind of going through a corridor, you're not yet to a combat, and there's a discovery, and it's like, you can go get that, but you might get a wound, or you might have to take a wound, and it's like this little cat and mouse game. It's like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll take a wound, and then you take the card, and then you'll take the rest of the wounds on it, and it's like, there's cool little like decisions and micro games in there and stuff like that. So that kind of stuff really sort of adds to just that dread that's underneath everything. The envelopes and everything, that's a really cool touch, that you can just pack everything up, save it, and then keep it going, and then, reset the game if you lose, or if you win it and you want to do it again. So definitely high recommendation for me. You get the good quality models, easy to assemble. They look really cool. Paint them, they look good. And then the whole sort of, there's tons of cards in here. There's tons of, combat cards, and the few combat scenarios that I've played through, they do feel different because you have like more or less cover. Sometimes it'd be like corridors, or just be some big open thing where you're just like blasting everybody. There's not really a lot of cover. So the decision to kind of go with this style of map, I think, works really well as well. As opposed to like just square. A lot of these dungeon rooms are like square, corridor, square, corridor, square, corridor. But this has a little bit more organic shape and feel to it. So I like that as well. Yeah, so I can just keep babbling more because I really like the game. But I definitely recommend it. I guess, I talked about the rules during the walkthrough to kind of take away. The rule books, the multiple rule books thing is, like I said, double-edged sword. It's cool. It gets you into the game. You're in there. You're blasting. You're going right away. You're going to hit these little wrinkles like, what do I do with grievous wounds? It's not super clear. Go check the FAQ. There was one thing I was like going back and forth between 2 books, and it's like, oh, it's in here, but it's in here. And it has you jumping. So like I said, look up a reference index. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't really work. That's kind of my main thing. But it gets you into the game. You know what? Who cares? You played like a minor thing wrong in your first game. Reset the campaign. That's what I did because I'm weird. But it probably didn't even matter. So, yeah. So anyway, definitely take a look at this. Thanks.